Hi, this is Clive Priddle. This is The Current, and today we are getting very noir in the tremendously exciting company of Michael Connelly. Michael, you are the author of many books, I think 35 fiction books at the moment and one non-fiction, and counting. Probably at your rate of production there'll be another one before we've even finished this conversation, but is that right? Is it 35?
35, working on 36.
Excellent. So in the course of your books, there are many important scenes that take place in the forensic labs. Harry Bosch often has to take some piece of evidence for forensic examination, and by and large, the forensic guys deliver good results. It moves the story on. I want to suggest to you that perhaps we should be a little skeptical of forensic science, that there's almost an over-reliance on it in some cases today. We publish Radley Balco, who's a terrific reporter about the justice system, who has a very critical book on the abuse of forensic science in order to get verdicts against people who it turns out are not actually guilty. So what do you think about that? Are we too reliant on science, and is it making us susceptible to abuse? Is the system rocking?
Well, I think I always have a kind of a healthy view of, the technology is great, but it's only as great as the people who use it. So there's always the possibility of things going sideways in a lab. I'm not saying that in a cynical way. You should give any evidence against someone a very critical look. And, DNA is by, and I think, I'm partly responsible for this. Television is partly responsible for it. People think DNA is the panacea, that it's the hammer, that it closes cases immediately. And that is not always the case. I have a podcast myself that deals in true crime, and I just finished a season that was, about a serial killer who, when they prosecuted him, just because they had his DNA on 3 different victims, it wasn't, the victims were prostitutes and there were sex workers, and therefore they would have had, there's a possibility that the DNA they found on these women did not necessarily mean it was the DNA from their killer. And so that was what was fascinating to me, because you take standard viewpoints of, they connected you to this crime by DNA, you're done, it's over. And this was a case where that did not bring the hammer down. And so from the standpoint of a writer / entertainer, whatever you want to call me, I like taking these standard beliefs in technology and flipping them if I can find ways to flip them over. And it does raise those kind of questions that, I'm not saying the science is junk, but there has been over the last few decades stuff that sent people to prison in the 70s and 80s has been, definitely knocked down multiple notches in terms of being exclusionary and in terms of determining guilt and so forth. So you gotta stand by. Right now DNA is the thing in forensics and in crime, and where will it be in 20 years? Who knows?
So, Michael, you mentioned Mickey Howler, and it would be wrong of us not to spend a moment thinking about him. So he is, by the way, I just want to say, I think the creators of Breaking Bad, and in particular the character of Saul Goodman, cannot have not read your depiction of Mickey Howler when they came up with that character. Seems to be a lot of shared character traits there. He's a classic dodgy lawyer, isn't he? Dodgy's not an expression I use a whole lot, so I'm not exactly sure what it means, but he is a guy who knows where the cracks are in the system, and his job is to wedge those cracks open wider. So hopefully his clients can slip through those cracks. And so if that's the definition of dodgy, yeah, he's a dodgy lawyer. I remember when they made a movie of him about 10 years ago, and Matthew McConaughey played him, and I visited the set a few times, and one time I asked him, what drew you to this project? And he said, because I think he's the kind of lawyer that can dance between the raindrops and not get wet. And I thought that was a pretty apt description of him. And maybe that also is what dodgy means. I think it's perfect. And I'm sorry to use a Britishism without sort of prior translation, but I think you've got it exactly. And And do we believe that the legal system is in good repair in this country? I mean, I guess having dodgy lawyers at least means that there's a defender out there somewhere if you need one.
No, I think it's a reflection of, the issues that are in the police department. It's an unequal application of the law. What people say is we have a flawed justice system, but it's the best one in the world. And I don't know about that. I don't know whether it's the best one in the world, but I agree with the first part that there's a flawed system and there's an unfairness. And again, it's like this technological question you brought up. Technology is great, but it all depends on how it's used and who uses it. The law is the same thing, are all judges perfectly impartial, those kind of things. The answer is no. And these things kind of put a finger on the scales of justice. And it'd be better if it wasn't like that. But from my standpoint as a writer, that's why I want to write about a guy who has to be, by the way the system is built, the way the justice system is built, and therefore, and kind of slanted, he is an underdog on page one. Yes, he defends people who are probably guilty of something, or most of the time are guilty of something. And so I have to kind of build, how do I get sympathy for the devil, basically, when I'm writing about Mickey Howler. But it's in the way he deals with the system as an underdog. I mentioned it earlier with Harry Bosch. The power and the might of the state is immense. And it all is there against one person, the lawyer defending the accused. And you can say it's all focused on the accused, but in a way, when you get into a courtroom, it's really about the lawyer. And so you have these classic underdog situations. And I think that's how you jump the gulf with a reader to be empathic and sympathetic to this guy. In all the books, Mickey, I don't write a book. Every Lincoln Lawyer book is not about him having an innocent client. That's only happened a few times because I'm trying to reflect what I think is what's going on in the justice system. But whether his client is really guilty or not, I think you get the underdog vibe from Mickey Howler, and that's what hopefully wins the day with those books.
You mentioned that Raymond Chandler was one of your inspirations, certainly for Harry Bosch. What about Mickey Howler? Does he come from anybody else that you read? Or I will tell you that the way that he uses the law felt kind of like a bit of Dickens to me. Dickens also was a great journalist and social commentator. And he was very skeptical about the law, recognized that it had to be there and that it was open to all kinds of intriguing abuses. And of course, they turn up periodically in his books. But was there anybody in your reading past that set you on the road to Mickey Howler?
Well, one of the, this will be a weird answer, but one, I talked about how that night in the police station after finding the gun was a key part. But I was already a reader at that point, and I became a voracious reader mostly because of my mother, but also because I spent a lot of time in libraries because both my parents worked, and I would go to the libraries and so forth after school and during summer and so forth. And when I was only 13, a librarian made me read To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a big deal for me because there was an underdog story, and because the lawyer Atticus Finch was such a fair-minded and kind of in a noble pursuit and willing to put himself and his family and everything he loved at risk to do the right thing. And so that is a parable that really stuck with me. And so Mickey Howler is mostly influenced by real lawyers and a college roommate I had. But he was like the classic defense attorney, long ponytail, thought there should be no drug laws, all drugs should be legal, and so he had a very liberal view of the law and a very jaundiced view of the system. And I loved all that stuff, and I had immediate access and deep access because I knew this guy since we were about 21 each, or 20 years old. And he had a partner, and so I was a fly on the wall for several years before I wrote the first Lincoln Lawyer book. But when I went into writing it, my college friend, his name's Dan Daly, I said, I want to mix Dan Daly and Atticus Finch. In fact, I even had this phrase in my mind, Atticus Finch with a ponytail. And so those are kind of like the twin influences, one literary, one from the real world.
That's great. So I wanna leave you with one question, if I may. And thank you very much for your time today with us, which has been wonderful. So I'm in New York City, and we are, as I gather you are in LA, reading of crime rates that are ticking up. Sometimes the percentages that people quote are kind of alarming, 20% more gun deaths than a year ago, but still, relatively speaking, compared to the sort of bang bang days of the 1990s, the number is on the low side. I mean, we would obviously prefer it to be going down rather than going up, but it's not what it was. When you're thinking about what you do, when you write about crime in America, is the America that you're writing about, you said it's a way of thinking about society and what's going on. Is the America an improving place? Is it a place in tumult? Is it a place that's falling apart? Where's America?
Well, I mean, you're going to reveal my politics here, but I think, at the moment we're doing this interview, we see light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, I think we've been out to the edge, I think, and almost could have slipped into the abyss. And that's just my personal view of things. I don't try to speak for America. I think if I write about Los Angeles, it can become America. I mean, it's very egotistical, but I think there's a feeling here that what happens in LA is going to happen. It's going to move across the country, trends for good and bad. And I feel that at the same time, I'm breathing easier because of the political changes and so forth in our country. I also am very concerned that I feel like we're tilting in a very bad way. And in Los Angeles, I would say, I mean, there's all kinds of trouble and problems in the world that have to be addressed, climate change and all that kind of stuff. But very particular in Los Angeles, it's become the homeless capital of the country. It is changing the city in great ways. When you go under any freeway underpass and you go into some of the more poorer neighborhoods, and they're lined with homeless encampments, and there's old beat up vans that people are living in all over the place. And, it's a terrible blight on our humanity. Like, why can't we solve this problem? And I only see that problem getting worse, day to day. And it's not like and with that comes all kinds of problems of crime and health and so forth. And it just seems like we're heading towards a Blade Runner type of society. And, not many people probably saw that movie, but it's Los Angeles. I think we've actually passed it. It's an old movie that was set in Los Angeles 2019 or something like that. And there's a lot of remarking about how close that vision of Los Angeles teeming with people, teeming with bedraggled people, teeming with homeless people. It was almost pretty accurate. And to me, I'm sitting here. You can see my window. I have a nice sunny view of the hillside and all that, but it's not realistic to what's going on in the city. And that's what I'm trying to mirror a little bit. I don't like to be didactic at all. My books, I don't tell people, how to think or who to vote for or anything like that. But I'm trying to reflect this moment in time, and I think it's a moment where we can go either way. We either have to accept and work on this this very difficult problem, or just let it go. And if we just let it go, I don't know what's going to happen to LA, and therefore what will happen in the future in the rest of the country.
Well, that is a brilliant moment, I think, for us to wrap this conversation. And as I said, I'm so grateful that you were able to join us. It has been, for me, a pleasure getting to know your books. And I'm going to go back to them. I'm going to dig out that nonfiction book as well, because I'm intrigued by that, which I didn't have a chance to read yet. So thank you. Thank you on all counts. And all hail the great Michael Connelly.
Well, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Hachette,